The phone call came at 3 in the morning. Jackie Chan was in another country on another film set, working 18-hour days like he always did. The voice on the other end told him his son had been arrested in Beijing. Drug possession. 100 grams of marijuana found in Jaycee's apartment. Police had evidence of regular use. The arrest was already making international news. Jackie hung up the phone and sat in the darkness of his hotel room. And what he felt wasn't surprise. It was something closer to inevitability, the sense that this moment had been building for years, that the distance between him and his son had finally produced a consequence neither of them could ignore. By dawn, Jackie had made his decision about how to respond. He would not use his wealth or connections to protect Jaycee from legal consequences. He would not hire expensive lawyers to reduce the charges. He would let his son go to prison, and he would make a public statement accepting responsibility, telling the world that as a father, he had failed. What happened over the next 6 months? Jaycee's imprisonment, Jackie's public contrition, the aftermath that revealed a relationship more complicated and damaged than anyone outside the family understood, would expose something Jackie had spent decades hiding, that the man who could do anything on screen had failed at the most basic task of it. To understand how Jackie and Jaycee's relationship became so fractured, you need to start at the beginning, with Jaycee's birth in 1982. Jackie was 28 years old, already a major star in Hong Kong, married to Joan Lin, a Taiwanese actress who'd retired from her own successful career when they married. Jaycee was their only child together, born into wealth and privilege that Jackie himself had never experienced. Where Jackie had grown up in servants' quarters at the French embassy, Jaycee grew up in a mansion. Where Jackie had been sent away to opera school at age 6 because his parents couldn't afford to keep him, Jaycee attended expensive private schools with every material advantage. But what Jaycee didn't have was his father's presence. From the time Jaycee was born, Jackie was essentially absent, traveling constantly for film work, spending months at a time in other countries, prioritizing his career over family life. This wasn't unusual in Jackie's generation or in Hong Kong's entertainment industry. Successful men were expected to work constantly, and family care was primarily the mother's responsibility. Joan raised Jaycee largely alone, managing the household, making daily parenting decisions, providing the emotional support and physical presence that children need. Jackie has been remarkably honest about this absence in later interviews. He said explicitly that he was not a good father, that he chose work over family repeatedly, that he missed most of Jaycee's childhood because he was always somewhere else making another film. He's described coming home after months away and finding that Jaycee had grown, changed, reached developmental milestones that Jackie hadn't witnessed. Each time this happened, the gap between father and son widened slightly, the relationship becoming more distant and formal. When Jackie was present, he was demanding and critical rather than nurturing. He held Jaycee to extremely high standards, expecting excellence in academics, behavior, and any activity Jaycee pursued. But he didn't provide the guidance or support that would help Jaycee meet those standards. He would criticize poor grades or inadequate effort, but wouldn't sit down and help with homework. He'd express disappointment in Jaycee's choices, but wouldn't explain what better choices would look like or why they mattered. Jackie parented the way he'd been parented, through discipline and expectation rather than through relationship and guidance. This approach had worked for Jackie himself, who'd survived brutal training at the China Drama Academy by developing self-reliance and internal motivation. But Jackie had been formed by necessity and poverty, circumstances that created resilience, whether you wanted it or not. Jaycee was being raised in comfort and security, circumstances that don't naturally produce the same kind of character. The discipline Jackie applied, demanding excellence without providing support, created pressure and resentment rather than motivation. There was also the impossible burden of being Jackie Chan's son. By the time Jaycee was a teenager in the late 1990s, Jackie was a global superstar, one of the most famous people in the world. Everywhere Jaycee went, he was compared to his father, measured against an impossible standard. Teachers, classmates, strangers, everyone had expectations based on who his father was. And those expectations were contradictory. He was supposed to be as talented and successful as Jackie, but he was also supposed to do it humbly, without relying on his father's name or connections. Every achievement would be dismissed as nepotism. Every failure would be highlighted as proof he couldn't measure up. Jaycee has talked about this in interviews, describing the psychological weight of growing up as Jackie Chan's son. He said that for years he felt he had no individual identity, that he was always Jackie Chan's son rather than Jaycee Chan, his own person. He tried various paths to establish independence: music, acting, business ventures, but each attempt was filtered through his father's fame. When Jaycee released music albums in the mid-2000s, critics compared him unfavorably to his father, which made no sense since Jackie wasn't a singer. But the comparison happened anyway, simply because of the family connection. Jackie's response to Jaycee's career attempts was complicated. On one hand, Jackie used his connections to help Jaycee get opportunities: record deals, film roles, meetings with industry professionals. Without Jackie's name and influence, Jaycee wouldn't have gotten many of these chances. But Jackie also made clear that he expected Jaycee to succeed on his own merit, that using the Chan name created an obligation to excel, that failure would reflect badly on the family. This created a double bind. Jaycee needed his father's help to get opportunities, but accepting that help meant he could never fully escape his father's shadow or prove he was successful independently. The relationship was further complicated by Jackie's very public infidelity. In 1999, when Jaycee was 17, a woman named Elaine Ung came forward claiming Jackie had fathered her daughter, Etta Ung, during an affair. Jackie publicly admitted to the affair and acknowledged paternity. The revelation was a massive scandal in Asia, where Jackie had carefully cultivated a family man image. For Jaycee, it was a deeply personal betrayal, discovering that his father, who was rarely present for his legitimate family, had had an affair that produced another child, a half-sister Jaycee had never known about. Jackie's handling of the situation made it worse. He provided legally required financial support for Etta, but never developed a relationship with her, never integrated her into the family, essentially treated her as an obligation rather than a daughter. This sent a message that was impossible to ignore. Jackie's children were burdens to be managed rather than relationships to be valued. If he could acknowledge Etta's existence but refuse to actually be her father, what did that say about his relationship with Jaycee? The message Jaycee likely internalized was that Jackie's real priority was his career and public image, that his children were secondary concerns, complications to be handled with minimum necessary effort. By the time Jaycee was in his 20s, the relationship with his father had settled into a distant, formal pattern. They saw each other occasionally at family gatherings or public events. They spoke on the phone irregularly, usually about practical matters rather than personal connection. Jaycee was living independently, pursuing his music and acting career with mixed results, and Jackie was continuing his relentless work schedule, making films constantly, traveling the world. They were father and son in biological fact, but strangers in emotional reality. Then came August 2014. Jaycee was 32 years old, living in Beijing, pursuing his entertainment career. Police raided his apartment and found 100 grams of marijuana. In China, drug laws are extremely strict. Even marijuana possession is treated as a serious crime, with harsh penalties. Jaycee was arrested along with a friend who was also at the apartment. The arrest became immediate international news because of Jackie's fame. Chinese state media covered it extensively, using Jaycee's arrest as an example in ongoing government campaigns against drug use among celebrities. Jackie's response shocked many people. Rather than immediately rushing to Beijing, hiring top lawyers, using his connections to minimize the charges, things wealthy and powerful parents routinely do when their children face legal trouble, Jackie made a public statement expressing shame and accepting responsibility. He said that as a father and a public figure, he felt he had failed to properly educate his son, that he felt ashamed before Chinese society, that Jaycee must face the consequences of his choices. The statement was formal, distant, more like a public official addressing a policy matter than a father responding to his son's crisis. Jackie did not visit Jaycee immediately. He did not make phone calls to reduce the charges. He let the legal process proceed normally. Jaycee was held for weeks before trial, then sentenced to 6 months in prison. 6 months for marijuana possession, a sentence that reflected both China's harsh drug laws and the government's desire to make an example of a celebrity's son. Throughout this process, Jaycee maintained his public position. This was Jaycee's responsibility. The consequences were appropriate, and facing them was necessary for Jaycee's character development. The reaction to Jaycee's approach was mixed. In mainland China, many people praised him for not abusing his privilege, for letting his son face justice like any ordinary citizen, for prioritizing social responsibility over parental protection. This aligned with Chinese government messaging about equality before the law and wealthy people not being above consequences. But in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and internationally, many people viewed Jaycee's response as cold, even cruel. Your son is in prison, and you're making public statements about shame and responsibility instead of providing support? What kind of father does that? Jaycee's defenders argued that this was tough love, that Jaycee needed to face consequences for poor decisions, that wealthy parents who shield their children from every difficulty are doing them harm. There's validity to this argument. Jaycee was 32 years old, an adult who'd made a conscious choice to possess illegal drugs in a country with harsh drug laws, and facing consequences was appropriate. But there's a difference between letting someone face consequences and publicly disowning them, between allowing legal processes to proceed and refusing to provide emotional support during a crisis. What made Jaycee's response particularly painful was the contrast with how he treated his stunt team members when they got in trouble or were injured. Jaycee would visit them in hospitals, pay their medical bills, ensure they had support during recovery, find them work if injuries ended their stunt careers. He showed loyalty and care for these professional colleagues in ways he didn't show for his own son. The message, intentional or not, was that loyalty went to people who served Jaycee's work and vision, not to family members who had their own lives and made their own mistakes. Jaycee served his full 6-month sentence in a Beijing detention center. The experience was harsh. Chinese prisons are not comfortable, even for celebrity inmates. Jaycee was held with other drug offenders, followed strict routines, had minimal contact with the outside world. When he was finally released in February 2015, Jaycee appeared at a brief press conference with him. The images from that day are telling. Jaycee standing stiffly beside Jaycee, both men looking uncomfortable, minimal physical contact or warmth between them. Jaycee made brief remarks about hoping Jaycee had learned from the experience. Jaycee apologized to the public, to his parents, to society. Then they left separately. In interviews after his release, Jaycee was asked about his relationship with his father. His responses were diplomatically neutral, but emotionally distant. He said his father was strict, had high expectations, wasn't very warm or affectionate. He acknowledged that growing up as Jackie Chan's son had been difficult, that the pressure and comparison had affected him negatively. He didn't blame his father explicitly, but the subtext was clear. This was not a close, supportive relationship. It was a formal obligation they both maintained because they were family, not because there was deep affection or trust. Jackie's public statements about Jaycee after the arrest continued his pattern of accepting responsibility in theory while maintaining emotional distance in practice. He said he'd been a bad father, that he'd prioritized work over family, that he regretted not being more present during Jaycee's childhood. These acknowledgments sound like genuine self-reflection, and perhaps they are. But they're also emotionally safe. Admitting past mistakes doesn't require changing current behavior or building a different relationship going forward. Jaycee could admit he'd failed as a father while continuing to maintain the same distant, critical relationship with Jaycee he'd always had. There's a broader pattern here that extends beyond just Jaycee and Jaycee. Jaycee has been absent or distant from all his children. His daughter Etta, from his affair with Elaine Ng, grew up without any relationship with Jaycee at all. He provided financial support as legally required, but never developed a father-daughter connection. Etta has spoken publicly about feeling abandoned, about struggling financially despite her father's enormous wealth, about the pain of having a famous father who acknowledges your existence but refuses to actually be present in your life. This suggests that Jackie's distance from Jaycee isn't personal. It's not about Jaycee specifically having done something wrong or being disappointing. It's about Jackie's fundamental inability or unwillingness to prioritize fatherhood, to invest the emotional energy and time that parenting requires. Jackie is capable of extraordinary focus and commitment when it comes to his work. He'll rehearse a stunt hundreds of times to get it perfect. He'll work 18-hour days for months to complete a film. He'll risk his life repeatedly for the sake of authentic action sequences. But he won't do the equivalent work for his children, won't invest the time, won't build the relationship, won't prioritize their emotional needs over his professional obligations. The question of why is complicated and probably has multiple answers. Part of it is generational. Jackie grew up in an era and culture where fathers were providers and disciplinarians, not nurturers or emotionally available companions. His own father was distant, having left for Australia when Jackie was young and maintaining minimal contact for years. Jackie is reproducing the parenting model he experienced, which was emotionally distant but materially supportive. Part of it is also Jackie's own psychology and priorities. He said in interviews that work is where he feels most comfortable, most competent, most himself. On a film set, Jackie knows exactly what to do, how to solve problems, how to create excellence. In family relationships, he's uncertain, uncomfortable with emotional intimacy, unsure how to connect beyond providing money and making demands. It's easier to stay on set, to keep working, to avoid situations where he feels incompetent. There's also an element of narcissism, though that's a harsh word. Jackie's entire identity is built around being Jackie Chan, the film star, the action legend, the global icon. Family relationships require subordinating your own needs to others, accepting that your children's development and well-being are more important than your career achievements. Jackie has never fully made that shift. He's remained fundamentally self-centered, prioritizing his work and legacy over his children's needs. The consequences of this parenting approach are now visible in both of Jackie's children. Jaycee, at 42, has had a mediocre career in entertainment despite every advantage of wealth and connections. He's never escaped his father's shadow, never established a strong, independent identity, never achieved the kind of success that would prove he's more than Jackie Chan's son. His drug arrest and imprisonment added public humiliation to private struggle. While Jaycee has continued working in entertainment after his release, mostly in mainland China, where the scandal has faded somewhat, he's not particularly successful or fulfilled by most measures. Etta, Jackie's daughter from his affair, has had even worse outcomes. She struggled financially, has been homeless at times, has publicly criticized Jackie for abandoning her despite his enormous wealth. She came out as lesbian, married her partner, and has been open about her difficult life circumstances. Jackie has not publicly responded to her criticisms or offered additional support beyond what was legally required during her minority. The message is clear. She exists as a legal obligation from a past mistake, not as a daughter he has any interest in knowing. Looking at both children, Jaycee struggling with identity and achievement, Etta struggling with basic stability, you see the cost of Jackie's absence and emotional unavailability. These aren't inherently troubled people facing unavoidable difficulties. They're individuals who grew up without adequate parental support, who faced unique pressures from having a famous father, who needed guidance and presence they didn't receive, and who are now dealing with the consequences of that absence in their adult lives. Jackie's public statements about his parenting failures have become more frequent as he's aged. He seems to be engaging in a form of public confession, acknowledging his mistakes, accepting responsibility in general terms. But these statements also feel self-serving in a way that's uncomfortable. He gets credit for honesty and self-awareness. People praise him for admitting his failures, while his actual relationship with his children remains unchanged. It's easier to tell an interviewer, "You were a bad father," than to actually do the hard work of building a better relationship with your adult children. There's a moment in Jackie's autobiography where he writes about visiting Jaycee after the prison release and feeling like he was meeting a stranger. He describes looking at this man, his son, and realizing he doesn't really know him, doesn't know his interests or dreams or fears, doesn't have the accumulated intimate knowledge that parents should have of their children. Jackie writes this as a moment of sad realization, and perhaps it is. But it's also a situation Jackie created through decades of absence and emotional distance. You can't skip 30 years of parenting and then feel sorry about not knowing your child. The not knowing is the direct result of choices you made repeatedly. The relationship between Jackie and Jaycee now, based on available information, appears to be formally cordial but emotionally distant. They see each other occasionally at family events. They maintain public politeness when photographed together. But there's no evidence of deep connection or trust. No sense that they've worked through the accumulated hurt in distance to build something genuine. They're father and son in biological fact, but their actual relationship is more like distant relatives who maintain minimal contact out of obligation. Some people argue that judging Jackie's parenting is unfair, that he came from a generation and culture with different expectations, that he did his best given his own difficult childhood and demanding career. There's some merit to this argument. Jackie is a product of his circumstances and upbringing, and expecting him to be a modern, emotionally available father when he had no model for that is perhaps unrealistic. But Jackie himself doesn't make this excuse. He admits he failed, admits he chose work over family, admits his children suffered from his absence. So the question isn't whether he failed, he agrees he did, but whether that failure matters and what it means for understanding Jackie as a complete person rather than just as an action star. It matters because it reveals limits to human capacity. Jackie could push his body to extraordinary limits, could create action sequences that redefine cinema, could build a global career through sheer determination and skill. But he couldn't do the simpler, more fundamental thing of being present for his children. The discipline and focus that made him excellent in his work didn't translate to family relationships. Or perhaps more accurately, he chose not to apply that discipline to parenting, chose to keep his focus on work where success was measurable and achievement felt satisfying in ways family relationships never did. The tragedy is that this didn't have to be inevitable. Jackie had resources other absent fathers don't have. Enough wealth that he could have reduced his work schedule, enough fame that he could have been selective about projects, enough power in the industry that he could have structured his career to allow for more family time. He chose not to, and that choice wasn't forced by circumstances or necessity. It was a genuine choice, a prioritization of work over family, repeated thousands of times over decades until the distance became unbridgeable. Now Jackie is 70 years old, his active filmmaking career winding down, his children middle-aged adults living their own lives with minimal connection to him. The opportunity to build different relationships has mostly passed. You can't reparent adult children, can't go back and provide the presence and guidance that was needed 30 years ago. The best you can do is acknowledge what was lost and try to build something different going forward, accepting that it will never be what it could have been if you'd made better choices earlier. Whether Jackie and Jaycee will attempt to build a better relationship in Jackie's remaining years is unknown. There are no public indications that this is happening, no interviews suggesting they're in therapy together or working through their issues. More likely, they'll continue the pattern they've established: occasional contact, public politeness, emotional distance, the permanent gap left by decades of absence that was never adequately addressed or repaired. Jackie Chan's difficult relationship with his son Jaycee is ultimately a story about priorities and consequences. Jackie prioritized his career absolutely, making it the center of his life and identity, and in doing so created an extraordinary body of work that will be remembered for generations. But that same prioritization meant his children grew up essentially fatherless, despite having a father who was alive and wealthy and famous. Jaycee paid the price for Jackie's choices, growing up in his father's shadow without his father's presence, developing into an adult who never quite found his own identity or path. And Jackie paid a price too, though perhaps he doesn't feel it as acutely. He created films but not family. He built a legacy in cinema, but not in the lives of his children. He'll be remembered as a great action star, but not as a good father. Whether that trade-off was worth it is something only Jackie can answer. But the question itself, whether professional achievement justifies personal failure, is one that extends far beyond Jackie's specific situation. It's a question anyone who pursues excellence at the cost of relationships has to grapple with. And Jackie's story offers a cautionary answer. You can succeed beyond all expectations in your work and still fail utterly at the things that matter most.